Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. I'm not sure if I want to keep calling these reviews and more just kind of like a general discussion. Feel free to leave below in the comments your own thoughts and feelings about the show as we go along. But I'm not trying to do like a plot point by plot point analysis. There's tons of other channels that are already doing that with pretty much any show you can think of. Uh, there's just a few things out of episode 3 of Rings of Power. I guess I feel like I want to comment on. And whereas obviously I don't do a lot of entertainment review. I mean, there's a smattering of it here on this channel, but for the most part, there's not a ton. This is mainly a tabletop role-playing game channel, but there's a good reason why discussing the Rings of Power fits that, because whereas the Rings of Power the jury is still out as to whether or not it's going to be a good Lord of the Rings show. You can at least say 3 episodes in that it is not a bad D&D show at the barest minimum. If you got some players or some people who are new to the setting or are still a little confused on exactly what the core peoples of a D&D world, elves, dwarves, halflings, orcs, so on, or what exactly it is that they're supposed to be like. This show is as good of an example as any, possibly better than like the old classic D&D movies that they made for the Sci-Fi Channel and stuff like that. So on that context, I will continue to talk about them until I get sick of it. I'm going to try to talk my wife into doing like a co-review just to kind of get her thoughts directly. I do find it interesting watching this show, as well as a few other shows with her, because since she's not as immersed in nerd culture, uh, getting her perspective and seeing how she reacts to certain things, can sometimes have an effect on my own opinion, where I'm coming into it, already like having like heard, what the internet's already been saying ahead of time before it's even out, plus whatever kind of lore kind of stuff that I, already feel like I'm familiar with. And so, yeah, I want to try to have her sit down and do a video with her. No guarantees that's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but we'll try. I mean, some people are just, a little camera shy, and that's natural. I mean, like some of the earliest YouTube videos I did were shitty, but unfortunately, you just kind of have to make yourself keep doing it until you get used to it, and I certainly have some room to grow. Speaking of room to grow, the Harfoots are kind of terrible people, I'm starting to kind of feel after watching episode 3. This whole thing they have, their uber paranoia. I mean, in some ways, it kind of ties into the way I portray halflings and D&D as being kind of subtly racist. I mean, they're really nice. They'll work with people of other races and go on adventures with them and do trade and commerce and all that kind of stuff. But they don't really want them living in their towns. We don't want big people around here in the middle of the night. That might feel unsafe. Kind of a vibe I try to give halflings, and whereas these halflings aren't quite doing that, they are, they're paranoia about big people and just automatically calling anyone who's taller than them a giant when this is a setting that actually has actual giants in it. So calling a human-sized person a giant is, well, isn't that a little bit of a slur? But yeah, Bob got left behind in the snow and we had to keep going, but don't worry, we didn't just abandon him to die cruelly. We're going to remember his name the next time we have a party. Yeah, I don't know. There's the longer spend time with the Harfoots in the show, the more I'm just kind of disliking them, essentially, and their attitudes. Also, like, just some of the stuff they're doing, like the stuff with the twigs and the hair and these spiky grass hats, and everyone's got to pull their own cart kind of thinking. I don't know. I mean, at least they're different, but that difference doesn't necessarily lend itself to something that you find sympathy with. I was hoping that that Dory girl would have been kicked out of the little tribe clan or whatever they're calling themselves, and to go off and have adventures with maybe Gandalf, and with her fat girl Sam with her, because it would have gotten us away from these otherwise kind of stuck up their own ass primitive Harfoot people, and could have had more like proto-hobbits discovering the big wider world and realizing that like the big people and city life and the fine culinary discoveries of elves and dwarves and humans, like, all actually has some benefit that they might not want to absorb. And then when they come back to their people in a later season, they could be a civilizing influence upon their own kind. But apparently we're not going that way yet. But of course, we're only 3 episodes in. There's only going to be 5 more episodes to go. The Arendelle segment of this episode, I kind of just felt was just spinning wheels. They have him imprisoned, doing forced labor by orcs. But like there's little in the way of movement. Now some of the other elves die, obviously, because that's what most elves seem to do in the Lord of the Rings, is they just stand there and let themselves be killed, unless you're one of the elves whose actor is in the credits of the movie. Otherwise, you're just cannon fodder and Middle Earth, apparently, and that even goes back to Peter Jackson. You can't blame that on this version of Lord of the Rings. Legolas is fucking jumping around, doing like anime level ninja shit, like Attack on Titan kind of stuff. And for some reason, all the other elves, they just kind of stand there and like, what? Oh, there's a sword in my chest. The music relies, the show relies too heavily on the music for emotional cues. Because like in that whole Arendelle sequence, there's a part, where the first elf gets his throat slightly sliced, and he falls and dies, and Arendelle is all like, no, not that elf that we just saw in that background just now who had no lines of dialogue. He was my favorite. I would have liked to have maybe seen more from Bronwyn. Oddly, she's a character that's grown on me. Largely because the whole sequence of her and her son having to fight off the orc in their house shows her to be a much more honestly brave character than, say, Galadriel. Galadriel, because she also has Legolas powers. She's all flipping around, and she's all, like, I'll just swim across the whole ocean, fuck it, and just being mean and, like, questionably intelligent when it comes to, talking shit to kings and nobles of a foreign land who, have the ability to help you get home, and instead you're going to be like, fuck you people, you wouldn't even have this place if it weren't for me. Looks like the cover of an angry Anya album. That Galadriel isn't brave, because she's so empowered and ancient that, her facing off against an ice troll, it doesn't compare to Bronwyn frantically trying to kill an orc with whatever she can just happen to grab at hand, just like hit him with the head with the frying pan kind of a thing going on. Because, she's not a trained warrior and is more a classic strong woman character as opposed to a male character in a female skin suit, which is what a lot of strong female characters of the last 20 years have turned into, going back to like Underworld and stuff before that maybe. Like her facing off that one single orc it took as a character a much more steel of nerve, because her certainty of being able to survive that encounter was way different than how Galadriel feels when she gets into a fight. Speaking of Galadriel, of course, obviously we're now into the Numenor section of the show. It might just, it could be in part because of the, pseudo Greco-Roman architecture and such as Numenor is presented. But that was around the point of the show where I suddenly found myself really being reminded of the Sam Raimi produced Xena Warrior Princess and Hercules Legendary Journey shows of the 90s. Not just because of the Greco-Roman thing, it's also the costuming, and I think to some degree it's this shotgun scattered diversity casting. It was actually rather reminiscent of how shows like Xena and Hercules did, where you'd have an episode where like the queen or princess of some ancient Greek city was a black girl, and you have all these Maori people on the ship crew in the background, and for some reason that just wasn't as big of a deal back then when those shows were being made, and it kind of stands out in retrospect comparing the two across time. Like Rings of Power has generated so much controversy online because of their casting decisions, and I think a lot of it really falls at the feet of the studios themselves and the actors for engaging with any of this and causing it to. It validates these positions in a way because you're actually deigning to talk about it, even if you're like saying, well, fuck you, we're doing it because of good reasons and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I'm sure back when Xena was on the air and Hercules was back on the air, I'm sure there were some assholes on the internet who were like, but Princess Andromeda of Athens wasn't black. But no one with any clout in the production of these shows or the media were engaging with these people and giving them any attention. They weren't breathing any oxygen on that fire. So it just kind of stayed a cold, simmering thing off in a dark corner of the internet that most of us casual viewers back then who were, weren't really aware of or didn't think of. Thought maybe even that was a good thing that they were doing that. And yet here we are, 30 years later almost, and I don't know, like some people just can't seem to deal with the presence of melanin and the presence of some of their Middle-earth characters. Now, as I've pointed out in a previous video, for at least the last 5 years, there's been, ever since The Last Jedi came out and the beginning of the fandom menace and all that kind of stuff, I've seen a lot of YouTubers and other people on the internet make a point about how things should be merit-based. We want the best actor for the best role, and if it's not right to, race and gender swap for these races over here, then you shouldn't be race and gendering swap for this race over here. What we want is for them to make original diverse characters. Well, Rings of Power has done that, and yet the bitching is still there. I've seen in my own comments, like, there's just no reason why a dwarf would be black. There's no reason why a dwarf would be anything. They're not even like, they're fantasy dwarves. Real world dwarves are of all colors, because that's a random mutation that can pop up in pretty much any child, potentially, if it threads the needle of random chance. Willow, there's a black dwarf in the Willow's village who traveled with them briefly at the beginning of the movie. Was there complaints back then? I was just a little kid when that came out, but, were there people on that DARPA net, like, oh my god, did you see the black midget in Willow? It was so unrealistic. My precious immersion was thrown off. It's there's the world building angle where since we know from history how life had been up until modern times, that since Middle Earth is not a world with cars and mass immigration and big highways and airplanes and all that kind of stuff, it is weird that every human village and every, elf society and every dwarf society, like, has this kind of mimicry of modern day American racial distribution. They could have just had a thing where, like, to the south, there is a land populated by black people, and that's where our black characters have come from. But, really, one way or the other, that shouldn't matter, because, like I said, you look back at the old Xena shows, I don't know, it didn't seem to, like, stand out as some sort of terrible thing being done to the white man, the way people act about it now. And the more the show goes on, and the more I continue to hear people bitch about this, the more I can't help but ask myself, are these people just saying that they just don't want to see black people in Middle Earth, period, and they just can't quite bring themselves to say that online because they know what that kind of makes them sound like? And part of the whole trick of modern racism is the denial of racism and all that kind of stuff, using rationalization to justify positions that really actually have nothing at all to do with the rationalization. It just makes it sound better than what you're actually feeling on the inside. Black mermaid kind of problems as we have nowadays. I don't know, tying it a bit to D&D, like, say, you're a dungeon master and one of your players is black and they want to play an elf. Are you going to force them to have to play a white elf? I mean, it's one thing if someone chooses to. It's one thing if a white person wants to play an Asian character in an Asian setting and all that kind of stuff, yada, yada, yada. But are you going to be forced to? That's a little. Are you going to, if you, in a sense, if you can't, if you're not willing to be forced to play an elf of a different skin color, I guess that's kind of like a back way of just saying, well, I guess you don't get to play since you don't want to conform to my imagination. Um, I don't know. It's fishy. There's things that I've always kind of found fishy about the whole thing. Because as much as like yeah, there's a rationality to the merit argument, and there's a rationality to the not changing the features of established characters argument. It's just it's always struck me as what an odd coincidence that every single time any big movie comes out that features a prominent black main character or a prominent female main character, that these people are bitching about it, and for any reason they can latch onto, whether it was swapped or not. Um, I do feel that there is a stunning lack of gayness in this Rings of Power. Like, I can see a lot of like elf, human, straight sexual tension going on, but in terms of that kind of diversity, that hasn't reared up yet, unless like the two Hobbit girls are like teen lesbians or something. Um, But I'm sure if they were to do that, like, what if Galadriel like had like a lesbian affair with the Queen of Numenor? Oh my God, how terrible! Which is another thing, like going back to the weird juxtaposition of Rings of Power with the Hercules Xena shows is like back then, like having a little bit of lesbianism in an episode was like titillating and would like lead to great ratings and stuff, and it wouldn't lead to people like bitching all the time and oh my God, girl, not hot girl on girl action in my fantasy, so that would be terrible. um I don't know, it just seems as much as this show has flaws, the skin color of the characters is the least of them, if you can even say it's a flaw at all. So I don't know. I'm sure I've probably lost at least 5 subscribers just since posting this video. Feel free to join them or hit subscribe and stay around for even more wonderful Total Party Skills content. I have books. You can find them on DriveThruRPG or Amazon. There will be links below. Yeah. So I guess that's about it. Get out of here.